The sidewalk in front of the Willow Cafe in Greenwich, Connecticut, was warm with a soft June sun. When Vivienne Hartwell stopped breathing, she stood on the brick paving with her head bowed, her hands knotted tightly in front of her stomach, the bright red roses on her white pencil skirt almost obscene against her pallor. Beside her, Margaret Ellsworth, the family lawyer, had pressed one steady hand against Vivienne's chest, not to comfort her, but to keep her from sinking to her knees. A small crowd of women on their morning errands had stopped to whisper. From the far end of the sidewalk, a tall man in a grease-stained gray t-shirt was walking toward her. A 6-year-old girl in a pink dress balanced easily on his left hip. He extended his right hand. Vivienne did not yet know that the calloused fingers reaching toward her belonged to the richest man alive, and that he was about to flip her entire world upside down. 30 minutes earlier, Vivienne had been sitting at the small corner table inside the Willow Cafe, the same table where her grandfather, Cornelius Hartwell, had drunk his Sunday coffee for 40 years. He had died 2 weeks earlier, quietly, in his sleep, and the entire town of Greenwich had come to the funeral. Margaret Ellsworth had served as the Hartwell family lawyer for 2 decades, and according to the binding instructions of his will, this was where the final clause had to be read aloud, not in a wood-paneled office. Here, at his table, with a cup of black coffee growing cold beside the document, Margaret adjusted her half-moon reading glasses and read the words clean and slow, the way a surgeon makes the first cut. To preserve the controlling 51% voting trust of the Hartwell Family Fund, and to keep Hartwell Logistics Global out of the hands of Roland Blackthorne, Vivienne Hartwell must marry, within 30 days, a man named Declan Whitmore. He is a mechanic, a widower. He lives in apartment 3B in Queens with a 6-year-old daughter. Vivienne laughed, and the sound was thin and bitter. A mechanic, she said. After 10 years of building this empire, you want me to marry a stranger from a walk-up in Queens. Margaret, this is corporate suicide. The press will rip me to pieces by lunch. Margaret did not flinch. Cornelius thought about this for a very long time, she said. 25 years ago, a man named Jasper Whitmore pulled him out of a burning car on the Pacific Coast Highway. Your grandfather promised him half his fortune. Jasper refused. Jasper died last year on a construction site. This is how Cornelius pays the debt, Vivienne. And it is the only way left to keep Hartwell out of Roland's hands. Vivienne stood up, the legs of the chair scraping over old tile, and walked toward the cafe door without speaking. Margaret rose with her, calmer than the moment deserved. Vivienne, she said, before her client could reach the threshold, he is on his way here, right now. Cornelius arranged the introduction for this morning. The 2 women stepped out of the cafe and onto the sidewalk. The sun was so bright it bleached the red brick facade. That was the moment a woman walking her terrier slowed to look. The moment 2 friends drinking iced tea at the table next door fell silent. The moment Vivienne's hands knotted in front of her stomach and her head dropped, because she could feel 40 pairs of eyes finding her at once. Margaret laid her hand on Vivienne's chest, just above the heart, and held her there. The whispering began at the next table and rippled out toward the street. Did you hear? The Hartwell girl. Right here, right now. A figure approached from the far end of the block. Declan Whitmore wore a gray t-shirt with a dark smear of motor oil across the ribs and faded jeans gone soft at the knees. His hair was unbrushed, his jaw shadowed with 2 days of stubble. On his left hip, balanced like she had been there 1,000 times, sat a small girl in a soft pink dress, her tiny ballet flats dangling. He stopped 2 paces from Vivienne and extended his right hand. The calluses on his knuckles caught the light. I am Declan, he said. His voice was low and steady, with no flinch in it at all. You are Vivienne. Vivienne raised her head. For half a second, the man holding the child did not look like a mechanic. His green eyes had something in them that had read every page of the Wall Street Journal for 20 years and remembered each one. The look vanished as quickly as it had come, swallowed by the tired softness of his face. Maisie tilted her head against her father's shoulder and whispered, Are you Daddy's lady? Vivienne did not take his hand. She kept her fingers locked at her waist, and she spoke just loud enough for Margaret and the watching women to hear. I will sign the contract, she said. But this is a transaction. It is not a marriage. 2 days later, Vivienne drove herself out to Queens. She refused to meet Declan a second time at Margaret's office. After the humiliation on the Greenwich sidewalk, she needed to overpower him on his own ground, to claw back some dignity in a place where he could not be the calm one. Garrett Holt, her head of security, drove a separate car and shadowed her at a respectful distance. The black Maybach looked obscene parked beside the rusted hatchbacks on the cracked street. The brick walk-up had peeling paint along the cornice. 3 flights of staircase smelled of stale beer and boiled cabbage. She knocked on the door of apartment 3B and waited. Declan opened it in the same gray Henley as if he had not changed clothes since the sidewalk. The same dark grease still smudged across his thumb. His eyes were the same too, deep, still, watching. Maisie peeked around his thigh, hugging a battered stuffed rabbit with one ear hanging by a thread. "Daddy," she announced, "the cafe lady is here." Vivienne stepped inside without an invitation. The apartment was tiny and obsessively clean, the wallpaper peeling at the seams, the thrifted furniture arranged with a strange military symmetry. There was a single-framed photograph on the shelf, turned face down. She walked to the small kitchen island and laid out the offer in flat, professional sentences. "The prenuptial agreement is already drafted," she said. "You will receive a monthly stipend of $50,000 deposited into a trust account in your name. Maisie will be enrolled in the most exclusive private school in Manhattan, fully funded through her doctorate if she wishes. In exchange, you will play a devoted husband at every public event the Hartwell brand requires. You will not interfere in my life. You will stay out of my way." Declan leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen and watched her with the calm, patient expression of a man watching a loud bird argue with a window. The check was already in her hand. He did not look at the check. He looked at her. "I do not want your money," he said quietly. "Maisie just needs a safe place, walls higher than these." The sentence landed in the room like a heavy stone. Vivienne did not feel its weight. She glanced over her shoulder at Maisie, perched cross-legged on the patched-up sofa, humming softly to her rabbit. For half a second, she caught Declan watching his daughter too, and his eyes had gone dark in a way that was not tired at all. Something cold and dangerous flickered behind them, the way stormlight flickers behind a curtain, and then it was gone. Before she left, Vivienne stopped at the door. "Why did my grandfather pick you?" she asked. "The real reason." Declan answered without hesitation. 25 years ago, my father, Jasper Whitmore, pulled Cornelius out of a burning car on the Pacific Coast Highway. He died last year in a construction accident on a job site outside Albany. Cornelius remembered. The story matched the will perfectly, word for word. Vivienne did not press it, but as she walked out, her eyes drifted across the bookshelf behind him, and she noticed a single black leather notebook with gold lettering pressed into its spine. The letters were not English. She did not recognize the alphabet at all. Beside it, almost hidden behind a battered paperback, sat a small framed photograph of a young woman with pale blonde hair, smiling at someone outside the frame. The wedding was a 5-minute civil ceremony at the Manhattan courthouse. Vivienne wore a white pantsuit. Declan wore a rented tuxedo that hung off his shoulders. The only witness was Margaret Ellsworth, summoned from Greenwich for one signature. When the paperwork was complete, Margaret turned to Vivienne and inclined her head a fraction of an inch, the way a person nods when she has finished a difficult task that is not yet permitted to be discussed, and then she walked out without another word. That evening, Declan and Maisie moved into Vivienne's 10,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking Central Park. Vivienne drew her boundaries before the elevator doors had finished closing. "The east wing is yours," she said. "Maisie's bedroom is next to yours. I sleep in the west wing. We do not cross paths after 9 o'clock. The kitchen is shared, but my private chef cooks for me. If you need anything, speak to my assistant." Maisie was already spinning slow, dizzy circles in the marble foyer, with her arms thrown wide. "Daddy, the floor is so shiny, you can slide in your socks," Declan smiled, and for a single instant the rough mechanic's face transformed into something warm and unguarded. Then it was gone. He looked at Vivienne. "Thank you for the space," he said. "It is a contract," she answered, and walked away. For 2 weeks they lived like ghosts haunting opposite ends of the same mansion. Vivienne worked 18-hour days. Roland Blackthorne was strangling her Pacific shipping lanes with regulatory red tape, costing her $2 million a day in stalled container traffic. She came home long after the city had gone quiet beneath her windows, and she began to notice odd things. Despite the $50,000 deposits she made every month, Declan never withdrew a single dollar. The account simply sat there, accumulating like still water. He woke at 5 every morning, made breakfast for Maisie, packed her lunch in a small lavender thermos, and then sat on the terrace for hours with a cheap burner phone and that black leather notebook, writing in tight, precise lines of an alphabet she could not read. Once she had walked past the open door of his study and watched him for a full minute before he noticed her. He had not been writing then. He had been listening to a low, steady voice on the burner phone, and his face had been carved out of granite, the kind of face that had made decisions a country could feel. The instant his eyes found hers in the doorway, the granite vanished. He smiled and waved her good night. Every night when she came home late, there was a small foil-covered plate waiting for her on the marble island, with her name written on a sticky note in blocky, careful handwriting. She never ate it. She never threw it away. She placed each plate in the refrigerator and let her assistant deal with it in the morning, telling herself it meant nothing. One Thursday evening she came home early with a migraine that felt like a nail being driven slowly behind her eye. The Aurelian Semiconductors deal had collapsed an hour before in a conference call that had degenerated into open laughter on the other side of the line. Roland Blackthorne had bribed Aurelian's leadership directly, snatching $500 million worth of contracts from her in a single Geneva dinner. Her insurance premiums on Pacific Freight had jumped 12% overnight. 3 of her senior executives had begun discreetly polishing their resumes. The empire she had bled herself dry to build was beginning to rattle on its foundations, and she could feel every loose bolt under her ribs. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. The chef was gone. Declan stood at the industrial stove in a tight black t-shirt, stirring a slow pot of homemade tomato soup. Maisie sat at the island, working through a grilled cheese cut into careful triangles. "Chef has the night off," Declan said without turning. Maisie wanted soup. "There is enough if you want some." "I do not eat carbs," Vivienne snapped, dropping her briefcase. She pressed her fingers to her temple. "And I do not have time to eat. Aurelian just pulled out of our supply chain agreement. Not that you would understand. This is corporate politics, Declan, not a broken carburetor." He did not flinch at the insult. He lowered the heat under the pot. "Aurelian," he said mildly, "is their CEO Victor Hargrove." Vivienne corrected him with a different name, too tired to wonder why he was asking. "Right," Declan murmured. He wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Excuse me, I should call my old foreman at the garage." He stepped onto the terrace and slid the glass door shut. The instant the seal closed, the man on the terrace was no longer the same man who had stirred soup. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared, his green eyes turned cold and predatory. He pulled the burner from his back pocket and dialed 12 encrypted digits. The line was answered before the first ring finished. "Sir," said a crisp British voice. "Sebastian," Declan said, "pull the leverage file on Hargrove at Aurelian. I want him signing an exclusive supply chain contract with Hartwell Logistics by 8 in the morning. If he refuses, liquidate his life." There was a pause of one breath. "Understood, Mr. Whitmore. Shall I move on Blackthorne at the same time?" "Not yet," Declan said, watching Vivienne through the glass. "Let Roland keep playing his hand. I want to see his entire network before I burn it down." He pocketed the phone, exhaled, and let the predator drop back beneath the surface. When he came back into the kitchen, the tired mechanic had returned. He set a small white bowl of tomato soup in front of Vivienne. "You should eat something," he said quietly, and walked away. At 6 the next morning, Vivienne's phone rang itself off the nightstand. Her CFO was already shouting before she pressed it to her ear. "Vivienne, turn on CNBC right now." She fumbled for the remote. The breaking news ticker bled red across the bottom of the screen. Aurelian Semiconductors reverses overnight. Signs exclusive with Hartwell Logistics. CEO cites unforeseen strategic alignments. Vivienne sat down hard on the arm of her sofa. Hargrove had despised her yesterday. Today he had handed her a $1 billion deal before sunrise. She walked out of her bedroom in a slow, stunned daze. Declan was sitting cross-legged on the rug. Maisie was carefully clipping a row of pink butterfly hair clips into his hair, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. There was already one slightly crooked clip glinting against his bangs. "Morning," he said, his face perfectly serene. "Coffee is in the pot." Vivienne stared at him, then at her tablet, then back. A coincidence, she told herself. A logical CEO did not believe otherwise. The logical CEO would not permit any other answer. 2 months passed inside that strange, half-real arrangement. Maisie began calling Vivienne by her name without prompting. The crayon drawings on the refrigerator multiplied. The Hartwell Annual Charity Gala arrived at the Plaza Hotel on a cold Saturday in late October. It was the social event of the season, a glittering snake pit of billionaires, senators, and socialites. Vivienne had ordered a bespoke tuxedo for Declan from Anderson and Shepard. She had assumed the alterations would humble him. She had assumed wrong. When he stepped out of his bedroom that evening, she stopped breathing for a full second. The tailored lines clung to his broad chest and narrow waist, as if they had been grown there. With his hair slicked back and his green eyes suddenly cool and focused, he no longer looked like a mechanic. He looked like a man who could buy the plaza and burn it for warmth. The ballroom went quiet the moment they entered. Flashbulbs erupted. Whispers cascaded through the crowd in a hot, gossiping wave. "That is him. The mechanic from the Willow Cafe sidewalk. Cleans up surprisingly well. Look at the calluses on his hand." Vivienne kept her chin high, her arm looped stiffly through his. To his credit, Declan was a stone. His pulse, where her fingers rested against the inside of his elbow, beat slow and steady, terrifyingly steady, like a man waiting in ambush. Halfway through the evening, Roland Blackthorne approached with a crystal tumbler of scotch and 2 sycophantic executives in tow. "Vivienne, darling," he purred, his eyes raking her body before dismissing Declan entirely. "I am surprised you brought the help to such a sophisticated event." Then he turned to Declan with theatrical contempt. "Declan, is it? I hear you fix cars. Tell me, do you even know what a derivative is? Or do you only know how to change a tire?" The executive snickered on cue. Vivienne stepped forward, fury rising, but Declan's hand settled gently against the small of her back, stopping her. Declan slowly, smoothly, plucked the crystal tumbler of scotch right out of Roland's hand. He did it so authoritatively that Roland was too stunned to resist. Declan swirled the amber liquid, took 1 step closer, and lowered his voice so that only Roland and Vivienne could hear. "A derivative, Roland," he said softly, "is a financial contract whose value depends entirely on an underlying asset, much like how your share price currently depends entirely on the fabricated third-quarter earnings report you filed last Tuesday in the Cayman Islands." Roland's smug smile vanished, the color drained from his face in 2 slow seconds. "I also know," Declan continued, "that you mortgaged your own mother's estate in Greenwich to cover your margin calls. One anonymous call to the SEC, and you are not just losing your company, you are wearing federal denim for 20 years. He pressed the tumbler back into Roland's trembling hand. "Stay away from my wife," he said. Roland looked as though he might be sick on the marble floor. He turned and practically sprinted out of the ballroom, abandoning his coat, abandoning his executives, abandoning his pride. Vivienne grabbed Declan's elbow and pulled him into the quiet alcove behind a marble column. "What did you say to him?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Declan shrugged, already wearing the polite mechanic's mask again. "I told him a joke I heard at the garage." "Do not lie to me," she hissed. Her eyes dropped to the hand he had used. Yes, there were calluses, but they were not the haphazard, scattered calluses of a man who slipped wrenches. They were precise, symmetrical calluses, the kind a martial artist accumulates from decades of disciplined contact. And then her gaze caught on his watch. She had noticed it before and dismissed it as some thrift store knockoff. Under the chandelier light now, she saw it clearly. The hand-painted dial, the flawless gear rotation. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, but not just any model. It was the prototype, a watch rumored to have been sold at a secret auction in Geneva to an anonymous buyer for $31 million. "Declan," she breathed. "Who exactly are you?" He did not answer. He simply placed his hand on her waist, steadying her, and spoke softly into her hair. "Let us go home, Vivienne. Tonight is not the place for this conversation." She did not sleep that night. She locked herself in her home office and called Donovan Croft, a former MI6 operative who now ran corporate intelligence for the most paranoid families on Wall Street. "Find out who Declan Whitmore really is," she ordered. "By morning, I do not care what it costs. I do not care what laws you bend. I want a name, a face, a history, a photograph. I want to know who is sleeping under my roof with my daughter in the next room." Donovan called back at 4 in the morning. His voice, normally bored and ironic, was laced with a panic she had never heard from him before. "Vivienne, call off the search," Donovan said. "Declan Whitmore does not exist. The Social Security number was generated 3 years ago. His work history is a shell. The garage in Queens where he supposedly worked has no record of him on payroll. The construction company that supposedly employed his father went into voluntary dissolution 6 months after the accident, and every employee who would have known the family has either retired or relocated, all in the same week. When I tried to dig into the construction accident, my servers were hit by a retaliatory cyber attack so sophisticated that it wiped my hard drives in 60 seconds. My backup tapes burned at the off-site facility within the same hour. Whoever built his ghost profile is using military-grade encryption that I have only ever seen at the level of a sovereign intelligence agency. Vivienne, you are sleeping next to a ghost, a very, very dangerous ghost. Whatever this is, I am out. Do not call this number again." By 6 in the morning, Vivienne was sitting on a stool at the marble kitchen island, watching her husband. He stood at the stove flipping blueberry pancakes for Maisie, wearing a soft gray Henley, looking entirely domestic. He looked completely harmless. Vivienne knew better now. "I did not sleep," she said. "I was up all night thinking about $31 million Patek Philippe prototypes." Declan paused. The spatula stilled in his hand. He did not turn around. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "It is a knockoff," he said quietly. "I bought it in Chinatown for $50. "Do not insult my intelligence," Vivienne snapped, standing up. "You terrified Roland Blackthorne into submission with a single whisper. You possess knowledge of offshore Cayman accounts that my own intelligence division could not find. And Donovan Croft, the best in the country, tells me you do not exist." Declan finally turned to face her. The warm father at the stove was gone. The mask fell away in one clean motion, and what stood in front of her now was a calculating, cold, predatory stranger with her husband's face. "Donovan Croft is sloppy," he said. "He left a digital footprint the size of Texas when he tried to breach the Pentagon's back channels looking for my military records. You should fire him." Vivienne's breath caught in her chest. Before she could speak again, her phone exploded with sound on the counter. It was Garrett Holt. She answered without looking away from her husband. "Miss Hartwell, code red," Garrett shouted over screeching tires. "Roland Blackthorne went bankrupt at the opening bell. He has lost his mind. He hired a private tactical firm. Mercenaries. 4 of them just breached the lobby downstairs. They are coming up the private elevator now, looking for the ledger drives in your home safe. They bypassed the biometric scanners. I am locked out of the system." The line went dead. Vivienne dropped the phone. "Mercenaries. They are coming. Maisie is here." Declan was already moving. He did not look frightened. He looked furious in a way that felt geological, the kind of fury that precedes earthquakes. "Maisie, Bug," he called, his voice perfectly warm and easy. "Grab your coloring book. We are going to play the quiet game in the big metal closet." "All right." "Yes, Daddy," Maisie chirped, gathering crayons. Declan ushered Vivienne and Maisie into the reinforced steel panic room hidden behind the library bookshelves. As Vivienne stepped inside, he reached into the false bottom of an umbrella stand and drew out a matte black Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol with a suppressor already screwed into place. "Lock the door," Declan said. "Do not open it for anyone until I say the word Prometheus." He slammed the heavy steel door shut. Through the small bulletproof viewport, Vivienne watched in frozen disbelief. The private elevator chimed. The polished steel doors slid open. 4 men in heavy tactical gear stepped into the foyer with compact submachine guns raised, moving in a tight, military formation. They were stepping into a slaughterhouse. Declan stood alone in the center of the vast living room, a single figure in a soft gray Henley. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but Declan was impossibly fast. 2 suppressed shots cracked through the air, taking out the kneecap of the first man and the shoulder of the second, before they had finished pulling their triggers. The remaining two opened fire, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him and shredding $1 million of artwork in 3 seconds. Declan rolled behind the marble island and returned fire with surgical precision. It was not a firefight, it was a clinical dismantling. Within 45 seconds, all 4 mercenaries were on the floor, groaning, disarmed, broken. Declan walked over to the leader and kicked his weapon away. He knelt and pressed the searing hot suppressor against the man's neck. The man screamed once. "Who gave the order?" Declan whispered. "Blackthorn." The man choked. "He said if we could not get the ledgers, we were supposed to take the kid, hold her for ransom." Through the glass, Vivienne saw Declan's posture go absolutely rigid. Suddenly, the shattered terrace doors blew inward. 6 men in impeccably tailored dark suits rappelled down from the roof on black lines, securing the room in seconds. They were not police. A tall man with silver hair and a clipped British accent stepped over the broken glass and inclined his head respectfully. "Perimeter secure, sir," said Sebastian Vale. "Local authorities have been diverted. Shall I extract Mr. Blackthorn?" "Bring him to the Hartwell Global boardroom," Declan said. "I want him still breathing when I get there." He walked to the panic room and tapped once on the glass. "Prometheus," he said. Vivienne opened the door with hands that would not stop shaking. She stepped over the threshold and immediately covered Maisie's eyes against the blood spreading across the marble. Sebastian came forward and gently took the little girl's hand. "Miss Maisie," he said warmly, "shall we go up to the roof and look at the helicopters?" Once the child was gone, the mechanic was gone with her. The man left standing in the wreckage of the foyer was a king. "My name is not Declan Whitmore," he said quietly. "My name is Declan Ashford Whitmore. I am the founder and sole proprietor of Aegis Vanguard Holdings." Vivienne's knees nearly buckled. Aegis Vanguard was a ghost entity, the white whale of Wall Street. A sovereign wealth fund so massive it dictated the gross domestic product of small nations, the invisible hand that moved global markets, funded revolutions, and quietly owned the debts of half the Fortune 500. Its name had appeared in 3 Senate hearings and 0 press photographs. Treasury secretaries spoke about it in hushed voices behind closed doors. 2 prime ministers had reportedly resigned, rather than admit they had taken its calls. It was rumored to be run by a single reclusive trillionaire who had never been photographed, whose signature appeared only on contracts that reshaped continents. "You," she whispered, "you own the banks that own my banks." "Yes," Declan said, "and the shipping lanes, and the ports, and most of the satellites your logistics network communicates through. Cornelius did not give you a husband, Vivienne. He gave you the architecture of the modern world." "Why?" she demanded, tears of pure shock pricking at her eyes. "Why pretend to be a mechanic? Why marry me?" Declan's eyes darkened with a profound, suffocating grief that seemed to age him 10 years in 3 seconds. 3 years ago, he said, a Russian syndicate tried to assassinate me to erase a $2 billion sovereign debt I had called due. They wanted the loans against weapons facilities erased, and they thought I would never have the courage to claim them. They missed me. They hit my wife's car instead, on a quiet road outside our home in Connecticut, on a Sunday morning while she was driving to bring Maisie home from a sleepover. Her name was Lenora. I buried her in a closed casket. Vivienne covered her mouth with both hands. The syndicate then started hunting Maisie, Declan continued. They wanted to finish the bloodline. So I erased us. I scrubbed my identity from every database on Earth. I took my daughter to the poorest neighborhood in Queens, covered myself in engine grease, and learned to look tired. Aegis Vanguard kept running from the shadows through Sebastian. We moved trillions while I packed peanut butter sandwiches. But my grandfather, Vivienne stammered. Margaret. The scene at the Willow Cafe. Cornelius knew everything, Declan said gently. He was one of my earliest mentors when I was a young man. When he learned the syndicate was closing in on my location in Queens, he offered me the ultimate cover. Margaret Ellsworth knew everything as well. She has been the lawyer for both of our families for 2 decades. The reading of the will on the Willow Cafe sidewalk was staged. We needed all of Greenwich to witness you being forced to marry a poor mechanic. The more eyes, the more durable the cover. Who on earth would ever look for the phantom trillionaire of global finance hiding in plain sight as the pathetic charity case husband of the most famous female CEO in America? So why threaten to give the company to Roland if I refused? Vivienne asked slowly. Because Cornelius needed to protect you too, Declan said. He knew Roland was already plotting a hostile takeover. He did not just give me a place to hide, Vivienne. He gave you a sword. He gave you me. 2 hours later, the boardroom of Hartwell Global on the highest floor was perfectly silent. The panoramic windows overlooked a city that knew nothing of the tectonic shift occurring above its rooftops. Roland Blackthorne was strapped to a leather chair at the far end of the long mahogany table, his face bruised, his shirt torn, hyperventilating between two of Sebastian's elite guards. The double doors swung open. Vivienne walked in wearing a sharp crimson designer suit, her hair pulled back like a blade, looking like an empress on the morning of a coronation. Beside her walked Declan, in a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit, the Patek Philippe gleaming quietly on his wrist. The mechanic was gone. The apex predator had been let off his leash. Vivienne took her seat at the head of the table. Declan walked slowly around the perimeter, his footsteps the only sound in the room, and stopped directly behind Roland's chair. "You sent armed men into the home where my daughter was sleeping," Declan said. The volume of his voice was barely above a whisper, but the heavy glass of the boardroom windows seemed to shudder against their frames. "I did not know," Roland sobbed, sweat sheeting down his face. "I swear to God, Whitmore, I thought you were just a grease monkey on a Greenwich sidewalk. I just wanted the ledgers. I did not know." "My name is Vanguard," Declan said softly. Roland stopped breathing entirely. His eyes bulged and darted wildly between Declan and Vivienne. Vanguard," he gasped. No, Vanguard is a myth. Vanguard does not exist." Declan rested both hands on the back of Roland's chair and leaned down to murmur into his ear. "Roland," he said, "as of 30 seconds ago, Aegis Vanguard Holdings has initiated a hostile buyout of every single one of your corporate debts. We have frozen your offshore accounts, liquidated your real estate portfolios, and submitted your encrypted emails detailing your embezzlement to the Department of Justice. The FBI is currently raiding your offices 14 floors below us. You have approximately 4 minutes before they come up here to arrest you in front of your peers. I suggest you spend that time praying. You are already destroyed, Roland," Vivienne said coldly from the head of the table. "You are just waiting for the concrete to land on top of you." Sebastian stepped forward and hauled the sobbing man out of his chair, dragging him through the doors to be delivered to the federal agents waiting in the hallway. The double doors swung shut behind them, and the silence that followed was the silence of a battlefield after the last shot. Vivienne sank back in her leather chair, exhausted, exhilarated, utterly overwhelmed. "So," she breathed at last, "the mechanic is a trillionaire. The marriage was a tactical alliance. The scene on the Willow Cafe sidewalk was staged theater. Margaret was an accomplice, and my grandfather is the greatest chess player on the planet." Declan reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a folded sheet of heavy parchment. The prenuptial agreement. The contract that had condemned them to live as two ghosts in opposite wings of a penthouse. He set it on the polished mahogany between them. "The Russian syndicate that killed Lenora," he said quietly. "Sebastian located their leadership an hour ago. They have been dismantled. The threat is gone. The contract is fulfilled. You have your freedom." A strange, painful knot tightened beneath Vivienne's ribs. For 2 months she had grown accustomed to the quiet presence in her home. The smell of homemade dinner drifting through the corridors, the sound of small feet running across marble, the crayon drawings appearing one by one on the door of the refrigerator, taped up neatly with strips of clear adhesive. The grounding stability of a man who had never once cared about her money, who had never asked her for a single thing except a roof for his daughter. She realized, with a sudden clean jolt, that she did not want the ghost to leave. Declan reached out and tore the prenuptial agreement neatly in half. "For 3 years," he said, his voice losing its cold edge, "I have lived in the dark, building walls, trusting no one, attending my own daughter's birthday parties through a video feed routed off 3 continents. I married you because it was a strategic imperative." He let the torn halves drift to the table. "But this morning, when I watched you step in front of my daughter to shield her body from armed men with your own, I realized something. You did not just give me a place to hide, you gave me a home." He raised his calloused fingers and traced the line of her jaw with extraordinary gentleness. "I do not want to be your business partner, Vivienne. I want to be your husband." She rose from her chair. She had crushed rivals before breakfast for a decade, and now standing inches from this man, she felt utterly defenseless. When his lips finally met hers, it was not a transaction, it was a world-tilting surrender, the collision of two empires fusing in one quiet, breathless moment. She gripped the lapels of his suit and pulled him closer, anchoring herself to the most powerful man on earth, who also, somehow, made the best blueberry pancakes she had ever tasted. 6 months later, the boardroom of Hartwell Global was full once again. The atmosphere, however, was unrecognizable. There was no fear, no whisper of takeovers. The Pacific shipping lanes had reopened in 3 weeks. The Aurelian contract had quietly become the smallest deal on the books. 3 of the executives who had been polishing their resumes were now writing thank you notes instead. Vivienne stood at the head of the table, projecting the quarterly earnings on the back wall. They had not just tripled, they had shattered global records. The merger of Hartwell Logistics infrastructure with the infinite capital of Aegis Vanguard had created a financial leviathan that could not be challenged on any continent. The heavy glass doors swung open. Declan walked in with Maisie riding on his shoulders, the same easy way he had carried her on his hip the morning of the Willow Cafe sidewalk. Only now there was no engine grease on his shirt. Maisie wore a tiny custom-made navy suit that matched her stepmother's, holding her stuffed rabbit in one hand and a stock portfolio in the other. "Sorry we are late," Declan smiled, lowering Maisie down. He crossed the room and pressed a kiss to Vivienne's temple in front of the entire stunned board of directors. Someone insisted on stopping for ice cream before the meeting. "Ice cream is good for brain power, Daddy," Maisie announced solemnly, climbing into the leather chair beside Vivienne. She set her rabbit primly on the mahogany and opened her tiny portfolio with the seriousness of a woman 3 times her age. Vivienne looked at the executives, then at the child clambering onto the seat beside her, then at the man who had quietly turned her entire world upside down. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that no amount of money could ever buy. "Let us continue the meeting," she said, her voice ringing with absolute confidence. "We have an empire to run." Vivienne Hartwell had once believed she had been sold cheaply on the sidewalk in front of the Willow Cafe, beneath the watching eyes of all of Greenwich, the morning the lawyer's hand had pressed against her chest to keep her standing. She had not understood. Her grandfather had not sold her. He had given her a home, and the poor man with the grease-stained hands, carrying his small daughter on his left hip that morning, had turned out to be the richest man alive, not because of what he owned, but because of what he had chosen to stay and protect.